Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Olo and today I've got something a little bit different for you. A fun discussion on a topic all about kind of the power creep of the Soulsborne games. A back and forth I've been having with Josh recently was all about the old bosses versus the new ones. Who would beat who if the two had to fight it out? It's a classic conversation I'm sure plenty of people had on so many different topics. But it did make me realize something conceptually. The bosses of the From Software games are getting bigger and stronger in just the idea of them. Your main bosses aren't really just a Capra demon in a room with some dogs. These days, it's this guy riding a tiny horse who's learned gravity magic just so he can ride that tiny horse. A warrior of insane renown, the only one to hold back a previously undefeated fighter, and a man so powerful he can hold back the literal stars. But the question is, would Radan win if he were to fight, say, another famed rider, like, say, the Nameless King? After all, the Nameless King is speculated to be the son of Gwyn, the original Lord of Cinder, cast out because he sided with the dragons, despite being from a faction whose origins are all about hunting them. So in this video, I'm going to take 5 main boss fights from Elden Ring and pit them against another main boss from a previous title and see who I think comes out on top. A fun and a little bit silly discussion, but with a conclusion in the end. So let's begin. Starting with a big one. Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Said to be undefeated and the target of the outer god of rot. Barely containing that scarlet nightmare, she ravaged the lands of Caelid just to beat Radan. But also an incredible warrior, the peak of swordsmanship in Elden Ring, and super powerful obviously when she transforms. Would she win if she had to fight Sekiro's final boss, Lord Ishin, the Sword Saint? He too is a swordsman very respected, considered a legendary warrior who earned that title Sword Saint. He founded an entire clan himself, the Ishin clan. Simply, he fought time and time again just to hone his skill with the sword, forming that renowned Ashina style of fighting. So strong, in fact, was Ishin that he eventually took the land of Ashina, the entire region, for himself through his ability with the sword. Clearly, Malenia and Ishin are both the peak of sword fighting in their respective worlds. But Malenia had none of the ambition that Ishin had. Interestingly, both Ishin and Malenia suffer from an illness. Ishin suffers from an unnamed disease, which was a grave illness that ultimately took his life in the game. A sort of natural death, a man of his very old age. But despite that, he continued to keep enemies of Ashina at bay. While gravely ill, he would still don a disguise and personally hunt spies and invaders. He battles against his own illness and continues to fight for what he believes is right. Just like Malenia, who struggles against her own sickness, the victim and target of that outer god of rot. She, through various means, suppresses that influence, but unlike Ishin, she does succumb to it. She has bloomed not only once, but twice before the player even meets her, and ultimately she does that third bloom and finally becomes that goddess in true, with essential superpowers as the avatar of rot. Now, despite the fact that Ishin dies in the story to that illness, we actually fight him as the final battle and the final boss of the game, due to some returning from the dead situations. He comes back in his prime, and we face the younger Ishin, who shows you he is willing to use anything to win. Not only has he got his incredible power with the sword, but also the spear, and also a gun he'll pull out on you. Finally, he goes on to harness the very storm, striking at you with lightning he directs from the heavens. He was an incredible fighter who used any tool to win. And that's why I think Ishin beats Malenia hands down in the original fight. As we know, Malenia would never just accept defeat in honor or whatever. She would succumb and use the power of the rot. Like she does against us, the rot would take her and she would transform. She'd become the vessel of that outer god and unleash the scarlet rot on Ishin. And I think the disease would surely take Ishin, much like the illness that killed him in his normal life did. But yeah, even if he somehow fought Malenia to a standstill or won, he would still die because he wouldn't survive the rot. More than likely, I think Malenia would win thanks to that cosmic power of an outer god. Because conceptually, she's much more than just a guy with a sword who's really good with that sword. She is a goddess. But what of the first foe to make her bloom? The origin of the now rotten Caelid. I'm speaking, of course, about Radan. As I mentioned, Radan is not only a great fighter who learned from Godfrey, but he's also a powerful sorcerer who learned the incredible gravity magic, leading to his ability to hold back the very stars and that title, the Starscourge. Using that gravity magic, he can, despite his massive stature, still ride his very silly horse, Leonard. A comical and great character, despite his oppressive and scary visuals. And he certainly doesn't need need Leonard to fight and can turn himself into a damn meteor if he wants to, whether he's attacking with those huge swords or shooting huge rocks at you in unison. A brilliant and intelligent and scary strong warrior, even though he's in a weakened and mad state when we fight him. At that point, he's already been defeated by Malenia. He's all but a zombie eating the flesh of those he eats, pointlessly wandering the sands of the battleground. So what we face in Elden Ring is a greatly weakened version of Radahn. Even when you summon in all your friends, a small army, it's still a very hard fight. So how would he fare if he faced off against, the Nameless King? That likely son of Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder, the man who sided with the dragons and rides one in battle against you. Considering how he's a former dragon slayer god of war, this man who sacrificed it all just to ally with the dragons, he's able to harness great lightning power to fight with, and can enhance his weapon with that same power, or even use the winds to fly around at great speed. Well versed in hunting dragons, huge enemies would certainly not daunt him. And when you do take his mount down, that King of the Storm, he only becomes stronger by absorbing its power. But as I alluded to, I think Radahn in his prime would definitely defeat the Nameless King. While the Nameless King has great power and ability to hunt those large foes, I think the intelligence combined with the might of Radahn would win the day. I mean, let's be honest, Radahn would instantly rip the King of the Storm out of the sky with his gravity magic. There'd be no time to absorb power, and therefore no wind power for the Nameless King. And without those storm powers to grant him ability, he'd have his weapon and lightning, right? All to challenge the waves of lightning like gravity magic that Radahn has, as well as those missiles, the rocks, and the onslaught of his weapons. Now, if Radahn wasn't also surprisingly intelligent, it might be a bit more of a fight, but Radahn in his prime, he was looking to actually beat Malenia before she had to use the power of the rock to win. Maybe you could even call that fight a bit of a draw. So I believe Radahn, with his strength and his magic, would beat the Nameless King, even if he was powered up. Next then, here's a weird one. What about cosmic beings from space that rule in our lands? Yeah, there's 2 examples of that in From Software games. Of course, the Elden Beast, the enforcer of the greater will, sent from the stars, but also the moon presence from Bloodborne. That horrifying creature is an eldritch being that came from the cosmos, and it created and rules the hunter's dream in which you, the player, are bound. It is a great one, which is a multi-dimensional being that exists across multiple planes of existence, and they are considered gods who enforce their desires upon the lands to get whatever it is they want. Does that sound familiar to you? Yeah, the outer gods of Elden Ring are much the same after all, but in this case, the Elden Beast is actually not one of those. It's just an enforcer for the greater will, rather than it actually being the greater will. The moon presence appears to be literally a great one, that you directly fight in this optional but true ending of the game. And first, you have to defeat Yhorm, who seems to guard the moon presence beforehand, which is also familiar, isn't it? A boss that you have to first defeat before you get to fight the cosmic being directly, just like Radahn before the Elden Beast. But who would win if we were to pit the moon presence against the Elden Beast? And surprisingly, I think the moon presence isn't just an instant win, despite the fact that it's an actual great one compared to the Elden Beast just being an enforcer. This physical version of the moon presence is seemingly made up of human flesh and bone, and while covered in tentacles that seem to form a bit of hair and even a tail it uses to fight, it is flesh and bone and quite small compared to the Elden Beast. I think it's more of a manipulator of events, since it does have you hunt other great ones for its own purposes. While the Elden Beast literally enforces the will of the greater will, it very physically punishes Marika for going against the greater will, holding her prisoner within the Erd Tree, and does so easily. The very scale of the attacks it uses on you, in fact, those giant rune arcs, the rings of light, the golden stars that hunt you down, all in a place of seemingly endless Erd trees. It clearly has incredible power, while the moon presence, on the other hand, is more of a physical fight, where it swings its arms and its tentacles, whipping with the tail and so on. And yet it has its own magical power, where it channels something from its eye, which sets your health to 0, but that seems to take a huge amount of energy for it to do, and we can simply heal it back very quickly. So yeah, I believe the moon presence is more of a manipulator, and so in that direct fight, while very scary, it is manageable, it is reasonable to fight it and win. While the Elden Beast, it's kind of ridiculous that we even stood a chance against it, let alone was able to defeat it with just like actual physical attacks. It has such ridiculous cosmic power, and I almost like to think that its golden abilities would almost burn the moon presence away. What do you think? Alright, for our final 2, I'm going to be a bit quicker on these. Let's take a fun one, like Ornstein and Smo, the OG duo boss fight that was a wall for many new players. To say, hey, Everything before now, that was easy mode. Now we're throwing 2 bosses at you at once. And you may know if you did that originally, or fight like any duo fight in Elden Ring today, that concept is pretty brutal and a very different pace. You have to change how you manage the fight, and thankfully you usually have pillars to do that. Very similar, in fact, isn't it, to the Godskin duo fight we see in Elden Ring, which is absolutely despised by a lot of the player base for being so unforgiving and irritating. I mean, it never feels good to die to a guy who stabbed you through a pillar. Mechanically though, the Ornstein and Smo fight is a lot simpler. They have way less attack possibilities, they move a lot slower, they generally give you more space. While the Godskin duo fight, they end up destroying those pillars that were your safety net and rolling right over them, and then have that super annoying ranged black flame attack that interrupts whatever you're doing, meaning you barely have any room to breathe. Separately, I think the Godskins are stronger and more invasive than Ornstein and Smo ever were, due to probably the natural progression of these fights and the mechanics. I mean, it's been 10 years since they designed these fights. But who would win if they were to fight one another? I think it's harder to say with certainty on this one. I like to think that the Godskins themselves would probably win against Ornstein and Smo. You know, they are god hunters, especially with their annoying ability to regenerate as they do. However, maybe Ornstein, when giant, when he uses the power of Smo and it powers up, or vice versa, things might be different. Maybe as a single powerful unit, a giant Ornstein could have the advantage he needs. I'm not sure on that one. But finally, what of another gimmick fight we see in the Souls series? Not a duo fight, but a true gimmick, where you're given a powerful weapon that you use to fight the otherwise overwhelmingly strong enemy. We have this iconic fight in many Souls games, but personally, I really like the Rykard fight with the Serpent Hunter, and of course, the Yorm the Giant fight, where you're using his giant slaying sword, the Storm Ruler. Not the first time we've had that weapon in the series. Now in both fights we have a weapon that has this wind style magic to it, performing huge slams and staggering the enemy for great damage. But it's easy to say that the Serpent Hunter was a lot more mechanically interesting. You get all of your basic moveset of the spear, just enhanced by this wind magic, while also getting that incredible combo of Ash of War. The giant slaying sword though, on the other hand, is kind of just the weapon art, the wind slam, and that's it. Certainly less entertaining, but still cool at the time. Rykard versus Yhorm though. I think I know who wins. Yhorm was actually a really nice guy, a friend to many and a fighter who risked everything for his people. Yorm became a loved Lord of Cinder and went on to hold back the proflamed flame, which was consuming human flesh, and he ended up giving up his life to burn in the first flame to help everyone in the world. And he even knew that he would be brought back against his wishes one day, so he gave the Storm Ruler to a friend, the weapon that could kill him, ultimately giving us the chance to defeat him when the time came. Meanwhile, Reichard, that selfish jerk, just wants power. He just wants to consume the gods. He's a bit of a mad tyrant, and his own men went against him, desperately searching for a way to defeat him, which led to the Serpent Hunter, the weapon we used to win. So, who would win between the two? Sadly, I think Rykard would. Yorm gave up his shield when he lost a friend in the law, leaving him exposed in fights. I actually believe, though, Yorm would win against the Serpent, phase 1, with his huge machete. He could slice and even cut off that serpent's head. But it's when Rykard awakens that I believe Yorm would just lose. Sword against sword, I think it would be a close fight, but with Rykard's fire magic, that raining fire and skulls, I just don't think Yorm would survive that onslaught. Not without a shield, anyway. So, yeah, yet another battle I think goes in favor of an Elden Ring character. But that brings us to the end of this silly speculation, and my conclusion. Overall, I seem to think that the power level conceptually has never been higher in this series. The scale of the Elden Ring characters is mad. We are fighting demigods and gods and cosmic beings in Elden Ring, whereas in previous games, that would be at best the final fight. It is interesting to look back and compare both of these things, and see how far From Software has come in terms of designing characters as well as fights. But it seems to me that Elden Ring's characters, they're just stronger conceptually. Let me know what you think of all of this though. Do you agree with my conclusion on this? And what other interesting matchups can you think of? If you have enjoyed the video though, be sure to drop a like and maybe I can come back for more videos like this in the future. But until next time, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.